Welcome to the Meta versus OpenAI episode of Using AI, the podcast where we discuss how individuals and organizations are actually using AI and how they think about this space. I'm your host, Alex Denne, and I'm joined by senior ML research scientist Alex Papadopoulos-Kofiatis and AI startup founder and CTO Nitish Mutha. Welcome back, both.
Hey Alex, hey Nitish.
Hello guys.
So, Llama, it's an animal, not a model. I'm loving the pictures, the backgrounds you guys have here, which you can see if you...
in our backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm upset that I've gone for an AI-generated tiger here. It's actually nothing to do with llama, whereas you guys have beautiful llamas. There's 4 llamas in total on our screens, but the one we're talking about isn't an image. It is a large language model, Meta AI, which is what the acronym is, which is really forced. I don't like it, but I like saying llama, so I'll let it go. Could one of you just give us an intro to llama and whose model it is, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, even I was like thinking back in the day why the name Llama probably starts with double L, and that just gives a good excuse to call it Llama. But yeah, back in last year, about a year ago, February 2023, Facebook first launched Llama 1, and accidentally, I think the weights got leaked. And I think that was a one moment of time for LLMs where we saw a huge interest from the community after the weights were leaked, because prior to that there was not such a huge language model so openly accessible to public and to be able to do like a research work on top of it. So I think that really created a good movement, I believe, especially, or rather than saying movement, an interest in open source models. And which is why I believe why Llama 2 came to existence and why Facebook decided to give it away for research and commercial use. And yeah, I think, and probably that's like that's the reason why Facebook kind of started to invest more into open source, purely due to the interest shown by the industry, especially the research community.
It's interesting sorry Nitish, but the kind of open source they went for with Llama 1, right? Because they did not release the model weights publicly, so you couldn't, as an individual, download the model weights and use them for whatever you want. They did give them to I think, research groups and individuals that had a specific use case. But obviously the weights were leaked, right? But I think what they did open source with Llama 1 was the code that they used to train the model.
Yeah.
Which feels interesting also because with Llama 2, they kind of did the opposite, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I think with Llama 2, I think they open source the code, not the code, but the model weights, and but not the training data, which is where I think there's this kind of fine boundary between, is it really an open source or what exactly it is? I think they have been marketing it as open source model, but I do think it's not just really open source, probably more open access model, which you could use for commercial use. I think that was first in class where you can use that model for commercial applications, but really you don't have access to training data, neither the code. Maybe you could just do fine tuning on it.
You guys mind if we backtrack a little bit with the terminology that you guys are using? So the model was leaked. The model was leaked and the weights were leaked for Llama 1. Does that mean that they sort of accidentally open sourced it? Or did they intend to open source everything and then hold the weights back, and then someone leaked the weights anyway, I think on 4chan? Yeah, what does that mean? What can I do with a model when I don't have the weights? And what do the weights cover?
So the model and the weights are the same thing. So having the weights is having the model. So that's one thing. But there's another thing, which is the code used to train the model. So the code that Facebook slash Meta ran in order to produce those weights. But when we're talking about the model and when we're talking about the weights, that's one and the same.
Yeah, but I think if you have access to weights, then potentially you could just host your own model and then run your own inference in your own environments. You don't have to then rely on third-party service, and potentially that is more beneficial because then data privacy issues are taken care. You can just self-host things yourself.
Correct. And you can also do things, which is what the community started doing, right? You can fine-tune the model further because the model weights that were leaked for Llama 1 did not include any kind of instruction fine-tuning or RLHF. These are techniques that make it, these are techniques, for example, that were popularized with ChatGPT that make it so the language model is a lot better at actually holding conversation and following instructions, right? You tell it, please do this, and it kind of does that. So I think stock Llama was not good at that. But then the community, because they had the model, because they had the weights, could fine tune it, for example, on human instructions and turn it into something that's a lot closer to ChatGPT, for example. One of those projects was Alpaca, for example, that was quite famous at that time by Stanford.
Also, going back to Llama 1, I think the idea there was like to just to open source the code, source code. I think that kind of is kind of practice in research community where in the prior to this, like they were just like showing the code, like what exactly the model is, what the architecture is, and but hold back the weights. And if you hold back the weights, then basically all the investment you do for training your model is not given away. So that's where the IP used to lie in the weights. And now with Llama 2, they kind of just turn that around, share the weights, but not the code.
It all sounds quite confusing, I have to say. It doesn't sound like the most sort of coherent plan from Meta, which I think is sort of a staple approach of Meta. Each year is a new thing. It was, it's mobile, and then it's gaming, and then it's augmented reality, and then it's the metaverse, and now it's AI. It's like flavor of the month. Apparently, Mark Zuckerberg also has, a flavor of the month thing, whether it's UFC or something else. So I wonder if it feels a little bit haphazard. They obviously have a fantastic amount of data. So it's not surprising that they want to leverage that into large language models. But if someone said, what is Llama good at that, Anthropic or OpenAI or Perplexity or any of these names that often crop up when people are talking about the quality of the output of these models, I don't tend to hear Llama come up that much, but I know it's loved in the open source community. So are you guys able to talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it that that's the case? Are we still looking for what Llama's good for? Or is it just like a great thing to pick up off the shelf-ish and then do some RLHF, which is that's the reinforced learning from human feedback. Is that the right acronym?
Correct. Yes, it is. Yeah. So Llama has the advantage, I guess, that it's the only model that you can run on your own hardware from the ones that you mentioned, right? So if you have a use case that needs local processing, I don't know, maybe you're in healthcare, right? And your client does not want your data going anywhere outside your servers, then the other language models you mentioned are just not an option, and you have to use a local model. And then Llama is the basis for any probably local model that you're going to use. And then you don't need to use stock Llama either, right? Because there's a lot of people out there that have taken Llama and fine-tuned it into something better that's a lot closer performance-wise to GPT. Maybe not GPT-4, but at least GPT 3.5. I think like it's there's models out there that is based on Llama that have quite similar performance now. So sometimes you just have to use Llama.
Yeah, and having said that, I think as Alex mentioned, the quality isn't that right, but I think people who are caring, her application cares more about data protection or data privacy. I think probably this is one of the deciding factor for them to choose Llama over other models.
Well, now the strategy makes sense from Facebook because they want to be seen as a privacy-first organization. So that sounds very strategic for them, although we can all remain skeptical, I feel. That's really helpful. Thank you both for that info. Okay, so you've mentioned already a little bit about how it compares to others. There are use cases out there where it's sort of GPT 3.5, which is the default now for ChatGPT, I believe, although I think we would always recommend GPT-4 because it's better if you don't mind it taking a bit longer. Do we know of any notable examples of this being used or any large corporations, are there Fortune 500 companies that just don't want to share their data with the existing AI companies out there, but they are happy to, run their own flavor of Llama with their own data sets, fine tuning?
That's a good question. I'm not completely sure. It's very interesting to look it up, though, to see any kind of high-profile use cases of Llama 2.
Yeah, me neither. But I think one thing, a slight tangent to your question is like, one thing, if you look deeper into Facebook's licensing or license of this model, they have this exception where if a company has 700 plus million plus active users on a monthly basis, then you cannot use it for commercial purposes, and you need a special license access to the model. So kind of Facebook has played a bit smart there, where they just want it to be used commercially on a smaller scale or not a large competing tech giant for them to use the model, but just make it more like for non-competitive companies to make use of it and provide probably feedback on how their models are doing. Which is why probably there is no like such a huge example of like a big company using Llama in one of their major applications.
Yeah, from a little bit of research, I think one of the interesting things I found already is the suggestion that although you might want to use GPT-4 or Claude 2 for a commercial purpose, the companies who you might be facilitating that for might not want their data shared with those companies, as we've just discussed. So one really interesting use of Llama is to run Llama locally to redact the sensitive information before then passing it on to the commercial, before effectively doing that sort of passing of data and then bringing the result back to the client, or facilitating the data exchange in a way that does meet their data privacy and security needs. So I hadn't thought about that. So it doesn't need to be brilliant at doing everything, but if it can be good at doing some things, then actually it can plug in nicely to a wider ecosystem.
I just did a quick Google search to see if there's any high-profile use cases of companies using Llama, and I cannot find any, which is interesting. I don't think there's any like great examples of using Llama 2 in production yet.
No, interesting. I did come across something though, which was talking about Microsoft, interestingly, partnering with Meta and specifically around the Llama releases. Now, Microsoft always comes up in relation to OpenAI, so it feels a little bit like maybe are they hedging their bets, or it's just a different play to try and cover a wider market? Would it be people using Microsoft data centers that then want to run Llama on the data center and ensure that that data is not going anywhere else? Maybe that's the high profile facilitation, but this is supposedly the year, right? 2024 is supposedly the year of the hype dies down a little bit and we start to see real use cases. So it may be by the end of the year we see some great examples of Llama 2 in the real world.
Yeah, and maybe I think just because the quality is not at par with likes of GPT-4, probably there is no real production use on large scale of Llama yet. But it's still quite active in research, I believe, and smaller applications.
It is definitely active in commercial usage as well. I know a few examples of previous colleagues that are trying to use it for commercial applications, but nothing high profile yet.
And we mentioned the community side as well. Just looking at Reddit, there's a subreddit that's called Local Llama, and that has over 100,000 people on it talking about how they are running Llama locally. So even if we're not high profile yet, there's definitely a groundswell of people using tools like this and running them locally. Could they be run locally before? I think someone took a Llama model and changed it to run on C++ at one point. I don't know if that makes much of a difference to how widespread its usage can be. But when this is probably a really ignorant question, but when the model is shared, how does someone get it and use it? I would have no idea where to start, right? Like how does that happen? Do you have to use Python? Are most of these models in Python, or am I speaking complete nonsense and just stabbing in the dark here?
So in order to get it, first you need to apply to Meta with the use case. That said, they instantly approve currently, so I don't know if they actually check the use case, and then they send you a download link where you can download the model that you want. So they have several sizes of model, right? So you download the model that you want, and then how to run it. There's example Python scripts from Meta, but I assume that there's also now a lot of projects, like developer-led projects that give you easy ways to run it. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's, for example, a Windows application where you just load the Llama 2 weights, and then it gives you a chat window to speak with Llama. Or there must be online resources as well doing the same thing.
Also, I think it has got good integration or presence on Hugging Face as well to make use of Llama. Like if you want to run Llama, either locally or even try out on Hugging Face, it's quite straightforward.
Correct. One thing that's a bit different, and I was a bit disappointed, is that Hugging Face stores a lot of models, right, and allows you to download them, try them out. But for most of those models, they also have an online playground where you can try the models out. And this is actually disabled for Llama 2. So you cannot do this with Llama 2, unfortunately.
Just to say, I've put both the links to those in the show notes. So the Llama Access form on Meta and Llama on Hugging Face, if anyone's interested in looking at those. If I use Llama through Hugging Face, does that mean I don't need to fill out the access form from Meta?
You still do. So you need to fill in the forms and then sign into Hugging Face for that to work.
Also, in terms of hosting or using Llama, there are like few other solutions out there, like AWS Bedrock recently. Their whole idea is like how you can use various models like Anthropic's model or Llama model here with a fully managed solution and quickly deploy a model inside a private environment. I think if someone is looking to kind of have a quick use, less developer heavy access to models like this, I think this is a good place to look at. They currently provide like 13 billion and 70 billion chat models with a very quick access. And all other platforms, I think you need to have a bit of a developer mindset or understanding of a developer to be able to use these models and deploy these models either in GCP, Azure, or places like Cloudflare as well.
I looked a bit more and I found a link, Alex and Nitish, on Hugging Face that does serve a deployed version of the 7 billion Llama chat model. So I wonder if you can add that link as well for our viewers and listeners, and then you can actually go without any registration and play around and talk to Llama chat. Maybe it's a good time to point out as well that there's a few flavors of Llama that Meta has released on their own. Two of them being Llama Chat, fine-tuned on actual chat messages, so closer to what ChatGPT would be, and then Code Llama as well. That's probably a bit of a competitor to Microsoft's Copilot. One interesting thing to discuss would be, is it actually dangerous that Meta has open sourced the Llama 2 model weights and anyone can download it and use it for whatever they want?
Yes.
Yeah,
Surely.
I think it could kind of promote some sort of irresponsible use, or like open sourcing models could like risk having no guardrails, or anyone could develop an iteration of model which is dangerous and probably capable of doing some harm uh, over the internet. So yeah, definitely there are some concerns, and people have been raising concerns whether open sourcing AI or models is a way to go or not.
I think there's a little bit of a history of them delaying the release of some of the flavors of their models until they passed certain safety. I don't know whether that's a tick box exercise or whether that's actually, discernibly, objectively, yes, it's a safe model, even though it's open sourced. If we're talking about the dangers in terms of, can you personalize these emails and just spam people, then you could probably do that with any model. So what would it be that you could do with this that you couldn't do with the other tools out there? Where does that line gray between open access tools and tools that you can run locally and then use in some sort of malicious manner?
Like one version comes to my mind is like, because you can pre-train this model. So with not pre-train, because you can fine-tune these models. Let's say you're fine-tuning a model on OpenAI. Then in that fine-tuning process, there is still some form of guardrails or some form of protection OpenAI would have to make sure no one is kind of abusing the fine-tuning process. Whereas with Llama, you can fine-tune locally and all by yourself with less resources as well, which could then allow anyone to kind of steer the direct model into a different direction and make it do the things which probably the big companies are preventing it by various processes like alignment and red teaming. So all of that could be just bypassed if someone could just fine-tune locally a model with any specific sort of data they want the model to be aligned with.
It's also impossible to monitor because even if the guardrailing has failed to catch a dangerous use case, that use case could be discovered through monitoring and then patched on systems like OpenAI. Whereas with Llama, it's first impossible to monitor, so maybe those use cases won't be caught, and then also impossible to fix, right? Because you put your guardrails on, and then you just release that thing, so it has whatever it has in terms of protection. That's it. What's the alternative? To have like centralized control of all language models? That feels equally dangerous to me.
Yeah.
It's true. I think it's a subject we'll come back to many a time. Multilingualism. That's a mouthful of a word, probably a good thing. But GPT-4, Anthropic, I think they're good in a handful of languages. Anthropic is particularly good at Portuguese, for example, for some reason, and these fun quirks of models. But I think Llama is designed, or Llama 2 is designed to be more multilingual than the others. So if you have a particularly global use case or a multilingual use case, then it might be that Llama 2 would be worth looking at before, testing in your native tongue if Anthropic and GPT-4 tend to be good in that, and then assuming it'll be good in other languages, and then maybe it falls down. Whereas Llama might be a bit more consistent across a wider breadth of languages. So that's one interesting point. So maybe, those use cases take a while to build as well. So maybe we haven't seen them yet.
I actually thought it was the other way around, Alex. I thought that Llama was quite heavily English specific. So the language distribution for pre-training data is like 90% English, for example. So I'm not completely sure if Llama is good at multilingual generation.
So I've got that data here. So I remember seeing how many languages it said that it covered on Hugging Face the other day, and it was heaps.
Okay.
But you're also, you're not wrong, because it says that the training data was 90% English with 9% roughly in unknown languages. Although, oh no, it does say Meta notes that bias in training data towards English means Llama 2 will likely not be suitable for use in multilingual. How bizarre. Because you would think, wouldn't you? It makes sense intuitively. How many multilingual users are there on Facebook? You'd think it has a fantastic training set for that. I don't know, actually, here's an interesting question. Is Facebook more multilingual than the wider internet?
And is Meta using the Facebook data to train Llama? That's a great question as well.
Yeah, I think what sort of data got used to train Llama is also a question, because I think there was some speculation where they used copyrighted books as well to train Llama models. This is a big topic as well, like copyright of data and fair use of, like, can you use them to train models or not?
Well, maybe we could try and wrap up the conversation on Llama versus OpenAI, because we haven't done much of the comparisons. It's easier to do the comparisons with some of the others than it is with Llama, because it's almost like Llama is putting out a bit of a blank canvas for you to do what you want with it, right? It doesn't need to be flavored. Whereas the others tend to have a little bit of a style and a feel to them, and an approach that makes using Anthropic versus Bard, which is now Gemini, and OpenAI's GPT-4 and ChatGPT, they all feel very different, and it's quite fun putting the same prompt into each of the three of those, I find, and seeing how they react and behave differently. But I haven't done that with Llama, but I think it sounds like that's sort of partly intentional. So if I had to pick, and then I'll pass it to you guys, I think Llama is very interesting. it's almost like the Android of the AI world. And people prefer iPhone, which is obviously OpenAI in this case, to Android, but Android does have an ability to sneak up on you. So I think one to watch for sure, but I don't see it taking the crown from OpenAI when Llama 3 comes out. Unless that Facebook data, they start using it and it starts really bearing fruit, and the copyright wars mean that it doesn't become, or it doesn't remain feasible to train on the open web and make yourself liable for a lot of suing.
Android does have a much bigger market share compared to iPhone, right?
Yeah, but it's closer to 50-50 in the US still.
Let's say it will be
Worldwide,
interesting to see
though,
what happens with Llama. Maybe even though OpenAI might have bigger and better models, the fact that you can just download Llama and use it for your project might mean that it's a lot more widely used compared to OpenAI.
Yeah, I think there are some speculation. I think the time is very close where maybe we might see Llama 3 coming out as well. I think there are some rumors around it, like whether it will be open source or not, or have they changed their strategy again, as Alex was pointing out. Yeah, whether it will stay open source or not. I think Zuckerberg mentioned that they are focusing more on building products this time around, probably using their Llama models, maybe Llama 3. So yeah, that will be interesting to wait and watch whether Llama 3 gets open sourced, because that might give us an indication whether open source is the way to go or not for AI models, or is it really working? Is it really challenging the Gemini and Open GPT-4?
Does that mean for the first time we're all on the same page? And OpenAI better than Llama is what we're saying.
I think with Llama, we can see a lot of innovations. So I think a lot of probably innovation of like how you could probably train or fine tune a model on local machines, how you can run AI model on smaller machines, and that sort of innovation we could see. But I think the quality is still probably better suited with OpenAI and Google, given they're closed and heavily focusing on improving the quality of the model. Yeah. So I would say like open source suits innovation and new use cases and improvements to the model. But I think quality probably is not yet coming out from open source models.
It's getting quite close though. So they are getting better and better, especially models fine-tuned on top of Llama 2.
All right. Well, very interesting discussion. I feel like I've learned a lot. So thank you both very much. We'll share a whole bunch of links in the show notes. And we're always keen to hear which other companies you'd like us to do a bit of a deep dive into. So please do let us know. Lovely chatting, chaps, and speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.